what is the basic unit of matter? Anybody's had physics? We've all had some kind of elementary physics, I suppose. What's the basic unit of matter?
Energy?
Atoms, I think.
Atom. Very good.
Yes.
Very good. Sophie, or who said energy? Energy is a good
Zizi said that.
Zizi, thank you. Energy is a valid answer also. I really meant a unit on which it's, anyway, what I had in mind was the atom, because it's the smallest. Energy is a unit in physics, but the unit in matter, the smallest stable unit in matter is the atom. And all of our knowledge of the universe, physics and chemistry and astrophysics and everything is based on an understanding of the atom. Of course, we now know that the atom is not a solid mass, and it's not the smallest thing. There are many smaller things of which atoms are composed, but the atom is the smallest stable thing, material thing, that can continue and last not just for years or centuries, it can last for millennium and millions of years in its stable condition. So like that, I wanted to ask, what's the basic unit of life? You can say biology.
Years.
Sorry?
Years, maybe.
Years? Okay, I'm not talking about human life here. I mean all life. If the atom, as an analogy, if the atom is the smallest basic unit of matter on which all our knowledge of matter in the material universe is based, what's the basic unit of life on which all our knowledge of living things is based?
Cells, atomic cells, or how are they called?
Exactly, cells, exactly, Anna, that's right. The cell is the small, we say that the smallest virus is out for the moment. We don't like to talk about COVID-19, it's all.
Virus is a bad word now.
Yeah, we know enough about viruses, we can't get it out of our mind. But the cell is considered the small, stable unit of life, and its capacity to reproduce itself and create multicellular organisms is what we learn that actually that's our origin we've come from. Now, I'm not particularly interested in the matter and the life, but I am interested in the third question. And that's my point. What's the basic unit of management? Or what I've asked above, what's the basic unit of accomplishment? Because to me, management is all about accomplishment.
To head a goal.
Sorry?
To head some kind of goal to achieve, to strive.
Okay, anyone else?
Like for the management, the main thing is to plan well, a good planning, to follow up, and then to control and monitor.
Okay, those are all very good things, all valid.
To ensure that goals are achieved.
Okay, but let's go back to my question, because your answers are good, but I'm not sure they're answering the question. I'm asking, what's the basic unit? If the basic unit, the smallest unit that we study, that we can manage is an atom, and in life is the cell, and all of it's based on that. All of the material universe is a collection of atoms. All of the life biological forms and interactions are based on collections, larger and larger organizations of cells, which we call organisms. What's the comparable point for management?
Time, maybe, time.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, well, it's a tough question, and I don't say that there's any wrong answers to this, but the answer I wanted, and I think, I hope you'll understand why when I say it, is the act.
Act?
The individual act. And that's what management is about. That's what accomplishment is about. You can take this as an analogy, so I'm not saying other answers would be wrong, but I think when we finish, if you remember the answers you've given, you'll see why I didn't choose any of them as the answer to this. Why am I saying this? Because we started in lecture 1 talking about the macrocosm. We talked about the whole society. Maybe you thought you were coming to a course on organization of business, and here this crazy guy forgot where he was, and he spent all this time talking about the society. And we talked about the society as an organization, as an organism, and it is the context for everything that happens in our human world. And if that's the macrocosm in which the company and business and all organizational activity takes place, we talked about the company as the intermediary. The company holds, the society has all these resources. It has the people, it has the technology, it has the human needs, it has the natural resources, it has all of these things, the financial resources and everything. The company takes and draws from this macrocosm, just the way we draw from the atmosphere and the world we live in, the environment we live in, to build itself out of those component parts and run those parts. Now I'm talking about within the company or within the home or within the army or anywhere else. Within any organization, an organization consists of some things. Not just the people, not just the money, not just the machines and everything. An organization we're talking about is an organization for work. And the basic unit of work, the smallest unit in which you accomplish work. My work may be just to take this mouse and run it over the table, or to close down my computer, or to clean the table. The basic unit of work on which all the work and management of an organization is based is the act. Now, you may rightly say, what's wrong with the answers that we gave? And I said, there's nothing wrong with the answers you gave, because they are all existing. When you talk about planning, or you talk about thinking, or you talk about any of the things you mentioned, thinking itself is an act. Planning itself is an act. And to do a bigger act, like planning for a vacation, you need a number of smaller acts. You need a number of smaller steps of different types of element. So today we're going to focus on the microcosm of accomplishment. And the basic reason for doing that is to say that all human accomplishment starts with our capacity to execute individual acts effectively. And all improvement in management comes from our capacity to continuously improve the way we execute individual acts, not only individually, but in relation to other acts. And we took the example of Sully, which we're going to come back to, a very interesting act that took place within 208 seconds, which meant the difference between life and death for 155 people. And we're going to blow it up and try to say, after all, what happened in those 208 seconds? What determined why? How did they survive? Yes, Easy?
No, I'm sorry. Nothing.
Okay. What's the difference between life and death in the acts that took place, or the act, depending on how we want to divide it, of landing the plane on water and getting them off safely? So I think you'll agree, for the 155 people on that flight, this single act was a very, very, very important thing. And so we want to blow it up and look and try to understand what went into that act that made it successful. And generally, what's the difference between a successful act and an unsuccessful act? And what can we learn about successful acts that will help us be more successful in whatever we do, whether it's cooking at home, taking care of kids, teaching, or running a business. So that's the goal today, to look at the microcosm. And I think you'll see that if we really blow up the microcosm with a microscope, the way we do blow up the cell, or use the electronic microscope to blow up material structures and crystals and everything, we'll see the act is a universe in itself. Just like we now know the atom is not a single thing. It's not like a marble. You put two marbles together and there's nothing inside. It's not solid. It's so complex. It's constantly moving. It's constantly changing. And the nature of the atom depends on everything that's going on inside it, the movement of the electrons and around the protons in the nucleus, and the interaction of energy with it, and so forth. We're going to find that about the atom, about the act as well. And what we're talking about in this day is as valid for anything in life as it is for being successful in a company, in a job, or in the Olympics, or in anything else. So that's the topic. So I asked this question. I'm saying now that, like the atom and the cell, the act is really not just the basic unit, but it's also a microcosm. So what does an act consist of? If we want to break down the atoms further, we know we can break down the electrons, the protons, the neutrons, and the mesons and the quarks, and so many other subatomic particles that have now been discovered, and their interactions. We know that the atom is not a simple thing. If we want to talk about the components of a cell, we know there's the cell membrane, and there's the nucleus, and the mitochondria, and there's the DNA, and a lot of other things going on inside it, all of them interacting. Forget about that, biology and physics, but this is a subject for all of us. We may not all be specializing in physics or biology, but we're all acting all the time. So we ought to be able to reflect on what are the elements or components of an act. Anyone?
I think action itself.
Action itself. Okay, by which, and what do you mean by action?
To do the act, you have to make an action, a move.
Movement.
Right?
Movement.
Movement. Yeah.
Movement. Okay. So movement.
Making, yeah.
Sorry.
Decision making. The first step is decision.
Okay. Decision making, because whatever the act is, whether it's a conscious decision or a subconscious reflex, there is a decision to act. Very good. Anything else?
Planning of an act, of the task, and then maybe performance.
Okay, so planning, what goes into planning?
Well, if I want to perform a task, first of all, I think what exactly it consists of. Then I plan how do I have to do this. Even the very simple and small tasks, like, for example, cooking. I'm planning what ingredients do I need for this, how much time will be needed, and so on.
Okay, so you're thinking about particular aspects or things related to the act. You're breaking it down into the steps, into the procedure, into whether you have the materials you need, and so many other things, right? Okay, good. Anything else? When we were talking about the atom, who mentioned energy?
Zizi did.
Zizi. Okay. Zizi, when we were talking about matter, I was thinking about the atom, but when you talk about the material world, energy, the atom is full of energy. The atom is a ball of energy. So you are absolutely right. Is that true about an act as well?
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
We ourselves are energy, pure energy, and yeah, there's energy in everything.
Sure.
Everything needs energy.
So what do we've got? We talked about planning. I was looking for this word first, but that's okay. In order to do any act, we need to know something. We need to know what we want to accomplish. If I want to bake a pie, I need to know the recipe for the pie. I need to know the ingredients for the pie. I need to know the procedure for the pie. Whatever it is, we're turning on a computer or anything else. There's a certain knowledge necessary, maybe rudimentary or very complex. There's a decision that needs to be made. There's an energy needed to set the act in motion. And I think it was Georgie who said there needs to be a movement. And I would add, if we want to, my question was general, but if we want the act to be very successful, we would want that movement to be expressing skills. We'd want it to be a skilled movement. You definitely wouldn't want to eat my pie if I made it for you, I can assure you. Because even if I had the ingredients and I decided to make it and I had the enthusiasm, I don't have the skills in baking pies or making bread or any of those things.
But also, if I do have skills, but I have a lack of energy, I will have the same unsuccessful result.
Exactly, and that's the point. That's the point of having the four. We need all of them. We may take them as implicit, but if they're not all there, we're not going to get the, thank you for that, we're not going to get the full result. We need the knowledge of what we want to do or should do and how to do it. We need to take a decision to do it. We need to release our energy and put it in motion. And we need skills of whatever type it may be, technical, physical, social, mathematical, or anything else, in order to execute it. So these are sub-elements of every act, in some cases, depending on what the act is. So now, we're going to go through these and ask very, very fundamental questions, which everybody knows the answer beforehand, we think, or assume. Let's talk first about the knowledge. Today, we're going to talk about the knowledge. We're going to talk about the decision, things that we normally don't talk about in everything we're doing. And then we're going to talk about how these all go together to make what we call a complete act which is a successful act of accomplishment. So let's start with, how do you know what you know? It's not a trick question, but how do we know what we know? And that's why we wanted you to reflect on the story Silver Blaze. That's why I wanted you to read it. And I'd like to start this. Has everybody at least watched the movie?
Yes.
Because without you'll be lost if you haven't at least watched it. Okay. What we see in the story is that when Sherlock Holmes is brought in by the police, I think it was Scotland Yard, but by whoever the inspectors were, he was given a set of facts. The police have come to certain conclusions. The detectives have come to certain conclusions about those facts, which we found out later on were not exactly the reality. There weren't the right conclusions. Sherlock Holmes, faced with the same facts, he came to different conclusions, which he was able to validate and prove to himself and others that what he knew was right. And this is not just a story, because the mental processes that Sherlock Holmes went through are really the mental processes that any great mind goes through in coming to a knowledge that other people don't have. I wrote an article about 8 years ago on genius. The same principles we're going to talk about are characteristics of a genius in an area where he is really brilliant. Geniuses are not necessarily brilliant in every area. It may be specialized on physics or mathematics or or anything. But once you break it down, you can see that a lot of what a brilliant mind does, if we are trained to understand it, we can apply the same principles. And my purpose in doing this is to use the story of Sherlock Holmes because it is the story of a man of very high intelligence, doesn't explain it, of insight, intuition, or genius in the field that he's working. So we're going to kind of look into this thing we call knowing. Well, we have the facts. Well, sure. Well, Scotland Yard had the facts. So let's go through first of all. And what are the facts of the case? What are the...
Can I start?
Please. What are the...
So the facts of the case are that the favorite horse has been lost, and in addition there is a murder of the horse trainer, and the police thinks that they've already found a suspect because there are some facts that in their opinion is connected to this murder and disappearance of the horse. And these facts are that some people have seen this guy. His last name was Simpson, as I remember. The evening the murder has happened, he was seen by these people, and he was very suspicious. His acts were suspicious. And in addition, his purpose was to get the information about the horse, as he didn't want this horse to win. And the murdered person had his scar for, I don't remember the name. Guys, do you remember the name of this scarf or? Zizi.
Whose name, Sopa?
The item with what this murdered person was found.
Cravat?
Yeah.
Scarf, you said.
Scarf, yeah.
Yeah.
And there was also a knife in the hand of this murdered person, trainer. And first, police thought that this trainer wanted to use this knife in self-defense. But the thing was that this man who was suspected in the murder had no cuts of the knife, from the knife, but the murdered person had some cuts himself. Now, these were the main facts based on which the police thought that this Mr. Simpson was the murderer, and they thought that they had enough evidence to present it to the jury.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and on that evidence, they built their open and shut case, right?
Yes.
Yes, because they didn't have an imagination compared to Sherlock Holmes and Watson. Sherlock Holmes said that this policeman is very good in his job, but he doesn't have what we have. This is imagination. He said that we imagine things and then we try to prove that the correctness of this fact.
That's a very important comment. We imagine something as plausible, and then we try to create circumstantially, construct a story that matches our solution and see how much we can fit it in. Were there any facts? I'm talking facts now. Were there any facts that the police overlooked?
There was one fact, as Sherlock Holmes said, curious fact about dog, and the answer was that dog did not nothing that night, and that was the real curious fact, that the dog was yelling always while knowing unknown person, like this dog did in case of Sherlock Holmes twice. But that night the dog did not do anything. That means that in this case, where someone who was known for this dog, and that's why the dog did not yell.
So Anna, this is a very, very interesting, important point, because actually this was not, it is a fact, of course, but it wasn't a fact that could be observed.
Yeah, this inspector, as I remember, this inspector is asking Sherlock, is there anything that she should think about and observe? And the answer was a curious fact about dog. That
The observable
policeman missed this fact.
The observable fact was also with the sheep that they had the problems with their legs, the sheeps.
This is a very important point, Anna. We'll come back. Remember, we'll come back to it, because actually nobody absorbed that at the time. Nobody thought about it until after Sherlock Holmes has done all of his analysis. We'll come back to that because that's an ultimate fact. You're absolutely right. The point about the dog not barking was Sherlock Holmes not only listened or looked at the facts that could be observed, but the facts that didn't happen. What didn't happen at the time? That is, the dog didn't bark. Any other facts that the police did not take seriously?
This expensive dress bill that was found in the pocket of the murdered man. Why would this man needed so expensive dress?
Yeah.
This was the. I think this was the question that had Sherlock in the first scene.
The police said, we're looking at a murder and the theft of a very expensive prize horse. Who cares about receipt for a dress, right? So essentially they said they saw it. It's not that they didn't observe it. They saw the receipt, they had it on the table, they gave it to Sherlock Holmes, but they said this is an inconsequential, irrelevant fact. It's not something of significance, right? What else?
And I think it was also very important, this Sherlock found this candle, wax candle in the crime scene. And why would this criminal needed this light if he was going to ride this stolen horse? He wouldn't need the lights, so other people could saw him.
Excellent. So
yeah, that's what I wanted to add, that Georgi said that police overlooked to check carefully this scrambled mud while Sherlock was looking for something there. He knew there should be something and he found it.
In other words, the
police was concentrated on the very obvious things, that they on the visible things, and they didn't look what was behind those visible things.
And in this case, it was the not so obvious, but things that were right before them. And really were the key. What else did they miss?
I think they missed the traces. After the murder has happened, there were some additional traces
on the mud,
of the horse, and of the other trainer who took the horse and hid it. In her.
True. What else? Any other facts, basic facts of the case that were missed? I think there was one very significant.
That Miss Sherlock Holmes recognized that lady, Miss Straker, right? And she denied that they have ever met before.
And why did he do that? Why did he recognize her?
They were together at some event, if I remember correctly.
He was only pretending.
He wondered if that woman liked expensive dresses.
He wanted to know.
Because of that, yeah.
Knew about the dress.
He was provocative, like
he was
as always.
He was trying to find out whether the dress was for his wife.
Yeah.
I think I remember meeting you and you had this beautiful dress on. And she said, I don't have a dress like that. That's really what he was interested to know, whether the receipt was for a dress.
While explaining the process of the case, Sherlock says that in this case, there is woman with expensive taste in dresses, and this woman is from servants.
What else? Any very insignificant but very important fact? How come the stable boy didn't stop the trainer from taking the horse out of the
He was drugged.
He was given a drug and was under deep sleep.
How was he drugged?
With the food that
with the mutton, his supper.
By someone inside the team, inside the servants team, because others did not have access with dishes or food.
Well, there was an inference, at least the police grew, that Simpson went up to the window of the barn, and when he was talking to the boy in the barn, he dropped opium into the boy's dinner. That's what the police assumed. But why did Sherlock Holmes reject that theory as totally implausible? There was one more fact. Because
or maybe door was locked during this.
That's also true, Georgie. The door was locked, but when he went through a window, at least that's what he went up to the window to talk to the man. But there was something that really got Sherlock Holmes suspicious, because
Sherlock Holmes tasted someone on this window, but I did not understand exactly what was it. But he tasted someone. Something.
He said that the food with this drug has specific smell, but I don't see any connection.
Why didn't the stable boy know that he was eating opium drug food?
Because it was very similar to some species.
Because on that particular day, he was served mutton curry with strong spices in it.
So it wasn't, he couldn't realize that.
Now, the tiny little fact, which the police knew, but they just ignored it. This tiny little fact told Sherlock Holmes, how could it be that Simpson, who planned this thing with such expertise, how could he possibly know that on the day he's going to come and be lucky enough to drop the opium into the boy's food, that they would have mutton curry, and so he wouldn't be able to taste the opium? Very, very, very implausible. So on the basis of this one tiny little fact, the police had built a circumstantial case where a few things fit together. The Simpson had a motive. Simpson came there. Simpson had a brief interaction with the stable boy. Maybe he could have dropped something into the food. That sounds a bit implausible. He didn't have a key. So we don't know how he got, at least they didn't have a key. Maybe he threw the key away, they said. His scarf was there on the bush, so okay, we know he was nearby where the murder took place. But how did he luck out that the boy was eating mutton curry that night? And on the basis of this one thing, which was too implausible for him to accept, he said, is there a totally different explanation? And one of you said it, I forget who now, Anna or one of the, but that the only person who could have done this is somebody who knew what was going to be served for dinner. And then the number of potential criminals eliminates Simpson, and then he has to think of a whole new explanation working backwards from that, working backwards from the mutton curry. And then, of course, it immediately occurs to him, well, if the mutton curry was planned so that opium would be put in it, then, of course, the Simpson didn't have to drop it in implausibly through the window. The mutton curry could have contained the opium when it was brought to the barn. And if it was brought to the barn with the opium, the person who came and removed the horse was somebody who was known to everybody, meaning known to the dog, and that would explain why the dog didn't bark. It becomes more plausible. Now, who could be? There were only three possibilities. There was the maid who did it, servant maid who did it, but that's a pretty big thing. Okay, servant maid does all of this, and what does she do with the horse afterwards? And how did she kill the trainer? It doesn't make a lot of sense. Maybe this was an elaborate plot of Simpson's, of the trainer's wife to do him away, to get rid of him, but not a very good way to do it if you don't want to be accused. It was just good luck for her that Simpson came along and there was somebody else to blame. If Simpson hadn't come along, there would be nobody to blame. And then there's nobody left but the trainer himself. So just by trying to look at all the facts and not dismiss anything as irrelevant, he began to see there's a totally different explanation that makes more sense. But it still raises the question, okay, the trainer had a mistress, there's evidence, and he validated that the trainer's in debt in London. He sent word to his banker. Okay, so the trainer has a motive, possibly, not just Simpson has a motive. We don't know what the wife's motive could be, but the trainer could have had a motive because he wanted to, win on the bet, on the race. That explains that. The trainer would have access to the mutton curry. The trainer would have access to the dog. He would have a key to the barn. All of this is very plausible, but of course, it doesn't explain who killed the trainer and what happened to the horse. Mm-hmm. But there were still a few pieces of information that were not used even by Sherlock. He said, what is this tiny little surgical knife? And what possibly would a trainer be having with a surgical knife in his pocket? And why did he have scratches on his arm where apparently he scratched himself with this knife? It doesn't seem to quite make sense until you realize that we're still not looking at the act the way it really happened. The trainer had a motive. The trainer may have put in the opium. The trainer may have come back, drugged the boy, and come back later at night because we know his wife said that the trainer left the house in the middle of the night. Why would he take the horse out of the barn in the middle of the night before 2 days later is a race? What was he doing with the horse that somebody should kill him? And what is this knife? And then
he didn't want to kill it. He just wanted to damage his legs so that he wouldn't be able to win the game. So this was the plan.
So this tiny little knife, which didn't fit in, apparently it's irrelevant. Apparently it's useless. You don't kill a horse with a tiny little knife like that. It could only be used for a very delicate operation. It's not the work that trainers usually do. So what could he possibly have done with it that's consistent with all the other facts that we have so far without ignoring anything? It is, that is, as you said, Anna, he came to damage the horse in a very, very small way that wouldn't be perceived even when he raced, but would prevent him from winning the race.
And the trainer was also testing this this method on the ships, Sherlock Holmes saw this connection. He saw that the ships had some problems with their legs, and then in the end, he makes the connection between these two facts. And he concludes that the trainer was testing this operation on the ships to use it later with the horse.
And the interesting, you're absolutely right, Anna, and the interesting thing about this is that this is where it wasn't just rationality, because the fact that the sheep were damaged wasn't brought to anybody's attention. Nobody knew that. Mm-hmm. he went beyond the evidence that was presented to him. He went beyond the facts, and he had something like an intuition that, well, if my facts are correct, if his facts are correct, if I were the trainer and I were going to try to do such a delicate operation on the racehorse that nobody should discover, I would want to be pretty sure that I knew what I was doing in this. I would probably want to test it. And then he asked, he saw the sheep there and he asked the boy from the stable, is there anything about the sheep? And he says, as a matter of fact, a number of them have gone lame in the last few days. So he was able from the facts to infer or have insight or intuition about something else that was outside the evidence that was consistent. So when you think about it, and we have the whole list, you've done a very good job of identifying the factors, and maybe, I think we got just about all of them here. Of course, there was one more fact that we didn't train is that the horse was missing. Because if Simpson had killed the trainer to get the horse, where's the horse? Simpson's in a hotel or in an inn very nearby. So the police came up with the idea, well, there are gypsies on the moor, so the gypsies must have taken away the horse. It's all just circumstantial free association to come up with something plausible. But Holmes, the interesting thing is, only one explanation that's consistent with all the facts. There's only one plausible explanation that's consistent with all the facts. And this is knowledge. And this is why when in the pursuit of knowledge, instead of jumping to a conclusion from a few pieces of evidence that are convenient for us, we try to piece it all together in a way that it's consistent with everything. And when you reflect, and we will reflect, when you reflect on what made Steve Jobs think of launching the graphic user interface. We went to a lot of trouble in the narrative last week about Apple to set the scene about the conditions in America at the time and the developments of technology at the time and the hippie movement going on and the fact that people were afraid of the computer and jobs were being lost and you had to learn this crazy computer language even to communicate with them. Jobs looked at all the facts. The psychological facts he had as being a young man growing up in those times, the physical facts of the development of technology, the attitudes and everything. And he had this perception, just like Sherlock Holmes about the sheep. You see, if we can just change things, so instead of we having to learn to speak like the computer and act like a computer, we can get the computer act and think the way we do and work for us and empower us, we'll have a whole new solution. It won't be just a better computer. It'll be a whole new relationship between man and the machine. And today we have a term for that. We didn't have any term for it before. It's called symbiotic system. It's no longer the idea that the computer replaces the man or we have to adjust to the computer. It's the computer is there to complement us, to support us, to make us more creative and productive than before. And it's a whole new field in artificial intelligence and computer science. It's not we versus the computer. It's the computer as a tool to aid us. So this is the process that we went through, and we'll share this with you. For those of you who want to go back and look at it further, what were the assumptions and conclusions that the police came to, and what were the assumptions and conclusions that Sherlock Holmes came through? We've pretty well walked through that now. And now I'd like to ask you to think about, what did we learn from this? What can we take away from this about ways of knowing? I mean, not just thinking, but really coming to knowledge. What are the lessons we get from this? Anything come to mind? What's the difference between Sherlock Holmes and
May I say?
Yeah, please do, Susie.
This inspector had the lack of knowledge and also lack of experience. And the way the Sherlock observed the things and then he shared all his thought would be very good lesson for inspector how to observe things later in the same cases or different cases. I think that inspector was really good at his work, but he needed more experience and knowledge. And he had potential to improve himself and to learn on his mistakes.
Also, I would add that the lesson learned from this case is that we shouldn't limit us by the sheer facts, by just the mere facts, what we see, but just make more effort to think what's beyond, what could be beyond that, like Sherlock did, and the police, the inspector failed to do so.
Good, very good. Anyone else? What's the difference between the inspector and Sherlock? Any other point we can say that enabled him to succeed where they failed?
Level of imagination, maybe.
Yeah, skill of imagination.
Okay, good. Let's take a look at some of these things. Ways of knowing. I'm going to just summarize. There are many that we could point out, but I think some that give critical lessons. And these lessons are valuable in any field of life, certainly in business. How about this one? Don't mistake superficial appearances for reality. That's exactly what the police did. And of course, we do it all the time. And I assume that you all grew up the same way we did and everywhere by these simple aphorisms like don't judge a book by its cover or don't jump to conclusions, isn't it? We all know that. Some
Right.
that phrase, don't jump. The police jumped to conclusions because it was apparently, superficially, circumstantially relevant. And yet the resistance, you know, if you read his novel, the Sherlock Holmes stories, and I've read them many times for this reason, that they give a great education in mind and all. But one of the things, Dr. Watson is constantly asking Holmes you know, what do you think is the answer to the case, Holmes? Not just this story, in all the stories. He reads it in the paper. He hears from one of the policemen, and then Watson says, what do you think is the solution? And Holmes constantly tells him, it's better not to come to conclusions before you have all the facts. It's better not to try to come to fill in without all of the facts. Okay, that's one, obvious one. And the fact that the police assumed that the gambler had killed the trainer and then stolen the horse, they never got beyond that. A superficial appearance, the gambler was there, his scarf was there. Okay. Don't unthinkingly accept a view just because others do. This is one of the tough ones for everyone.
Very difficult one.
Huh?
Very difficult one.
Very difficult.
Because
we're filled with things all the time. We hear about COVID-19 and about anything. This food is not good for you. That one, you're sick. That doesn't work. We're constantly bombarded with views that are widely advertised and multiplied in the press, in our social media, or at our childhood, when we're growing up. And we never even stop to think of questioning whether they're true or not, because everybody believes them. And of course, up until about 1500, everybody believed, at least everybody in the Western world, pretty much everywhere, everybody believed that the earth was the center of the universe. And when we go outside and we see that the sun is rising in the east and setting in the west, the sun is moving around us and the moon is moving around us and we're standing still. Everybody knows that. Why would you think of even contemplating a possibility that we're the ones that are moving and the sun is standing still. It's common sense to everybody. In fact,
yeah, actually, when Giordano Bruno opposed that view, he was burnt on the fire. And later, a century later, everybody like learned that he was right.
exactly. And that's one of the reasons it's more convenient for us to just go.
Actually, that's what the media does nowadays, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Different opinion is not acceptable so sometimes, but it's wrong.
It takes a lot of courage not to accept just because other people do. And
in this, sorry to interrupt, in the story they assume the gypsies steal, so the gypsies must have stolen the
horses. I think so. The Simpson didn't have it, so it must have been the gypsies. There you go. Right, exactly. Who's going to defend the gypsies? Right. And I told you the story of Chrysler when everybody was convinced that Chrysler will be out of business in 6 months. And we wrote to Iacocca offering a different view. Everybody believed it was bound to fail because how do you know that? Because you read it in the paper. Because say it, and of course they all. So we're. Okay, third one. What does Sherlock do? He looks for connections between apparently unrelated things. What in the world does mutton curry have to do with the death of the trainer on the moor? What in the world does a receipt for a lady's dress have to do with the murder? What does the fact that the dog didn't bark or any of the things you have mentioned? He looks, nothing is unconnected to him. Everything is part of a greater whole, and he looks for the explanation where apparently unconnected, unrelated things are related. He connected, as you mentioned, the surgical knife and the sheep. Sheep have nothing to do with this case, nothing to do with the death, nothing to do with the racehorse or anything. But he saw there could be a plausible connection. That's an intuition. That's to make connections which we don't ordinarily do through what we call logic. The receipt. What is the dress? Who cares about the dress? The man's dead. I think we mentioned earlier when.
Why would he need that like bill for the expensive lady dress? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, okay, he's a married man, he's got a wife, he bought a dress for her, whether the dress
But this is an alert for Holmes.
For him, it's an alert. And he didn't just jump to conclusion, he sent a telegram to London to find out about the man's bank account and found from his banker that the man is deep in debt. And that made him understand, why is a man buying an expensive dress when he's already in debt? And he's a married man, and the wife doesn't even know about this dress. Then it opens up a whole new world. Oh, he's keeping a mistress, and he's gone in debt, and now he needs more money than he thinks he'll get if the horse wins. It all comes up. And I think we mentioned here that I think Vani mentioned it earlier when we were talking about Google. What Google was about the 35th company to launch a search engine after the internet was started from 94 to 98. And I think I mentioned even that I remember reading in the paper when Google announced their search engine and said, who needs another search engine? Nobody had figured out how to make money out of search engines. Nobody made any money out of it. Google took two apparently unrelated things. There's a free search engine, which you can't charge anybody for because everybody's got free choices. And there's the need of advertisers to want to reach a particular customer. By the search that somebody does, the advertiser can know something about the person. And those searches can tell them which are the people who are more likely to want to see to want to respond to their ad. And by simply connecting apparently unconnected things, they launched one of the most valuable companies in the world. And they're the biggest advertising agency in the whole world. And that's a major portion of their revenue and their profitability, because they connected things that other people had missed right in front of our eyes. We know that everybody's using the internet for advertising. It's the obvious thing. We know we need search engines, but nobody had put the two together. So this capacity to look for connections between unrelated things is really powerful for knowing. We were talking about imagination. Here's one. Imagine the potential of what does not yet physically exist. This is a power. We're talking about knowing now, not just Silver Blaze. In this sense, Holmes was, he was able to imagine what had happened to the horse. He knew that horses were gregarious. If the horse is not here, he would likely go someplace else where there are horses. And then he deciphered that whole thing of, and he imagined that the trainer from the other farm might have taken the horse, but the police had already gone there and searched the other farm. So he imagined that the man would have tried to disguise the horse. And because Silver Blaze had this big blazing color, white color down the forehead, it would be pretty easy to disguise him if you simply covered it over. So nobody had any evidence for it, but he was able to see it. And of course, we've had wonderful examples. We told the story of iPod, which is a really classic example of being able to imagine how to create a whole new, not just a physical product, a whole new way of transforming the music industry digitally by connecting a small device with the computer terminal and with the internet. He could see a possibility where nobody else had seen it. And Bill Gates, who was kind of a rival, they were rivals for 25, 30 years, but Bill Gates was generous enough to say it was an act of genius because nobody else would have thought that it was possible. He not only could imagine it, he could execute it. Okay, a couple of more, and then we'll take a break. Another important thing about knowing is the capacity to recognize truth in opposite points of view. When there's some opposing view which is very different than ours, there still may be a truth in it. The trainer has been murdered. That's a fact. Can we consider the possibility that the trainer is the criminal? It appears to be a direct contradiction. This is the victim. We're looking for the man who killed him. But only when you recognize that the trainer himself is a criminal, then you understand, you come to a plausible explanation of how he could have been murdered and who murdered him. That capacity not to get fixed in one-pointed perspectives, which we all do, we look from our point of view or a known point of view, the capacity to take the diametrically opposite point of view and see if there's an explanation like that. Supposing the trainer was not the victim. It's dead, the man's dead right before us. What could be more obvious than that? But the truth required that capacity to take the opposite point of view. We talked a long time ago now, maybe it was the third lecture, when Bill Marriott went to his lawyer in the Great Depression, and he'd already started 6 hot shops. And the lawyer said, Bill, my advice is stop while you're ahead. If you keep like this, you're going to grow right out of business. Bill heard his advice, understood the truth in the lawyer's point of view. It was a very valid advice because it's true even today that most entrepreneurs, when they try to expand beyond one or a few units do go out of business or run it or never make money on the other ones. But he could also recognize there's another point of view. There's a solution to that. And instead of just following the lawyer or foolishly ignoring him, he saw there was another truth. If the lawyer's truth is the only truth, then how would anybody ever grow a business and have multiple units and expand on and on and on? There must be something the lawyer doesn't know that he can learn. There must be some way that some companies grow and multiply over and over again. And he worked it out to find out what that was, how to convert the work he did as an individual and organize it and express it through an organization. It's not that one was right and one was wrong. It's just they were both half-truths. And the key was to how to put them together. This is always a very interesting one. Reconcile apparent contradictions to create a new synthesis. When you meet something that's a direct contradiction of what we believe to be true, and you look for a way to reconcile it, you discover possibilities which others haven't seen. This was the opium in the curry. How could the man have planned for this robbery with opium unless he was just lucky enough that the curry was served that day? The contradiction that the trainer had bought a dress, but his wife didn't know about it, that the dog didn't bark, that the key couldn't be found, and so forth. At the time when Sears started his mail order catalog, I think we told you, the motto in business was the Latin phrase, caveat emptor, buyer beware. The buyer should always never trust the seller. And Julius Rosenwald came along and created the very opposite view. The buyer can always trust the seller. We will make ourselves absolutely trustworthy to the last extent. And that suspicion of the buyer and the trustworthiness of the seller were enough to launch and make Sears the largest in the world. He could see that these two opposite views could be reconciled with one another. Bata did it when he saw that in the middle of the Great Depression and everybody said there's nothing we can do, we have to close down and wait for it to be over, that he could make it into a great business opportunity and become the biggest shoe company in the world in 5 years by looking at this tragedy as an opportunity. And there are companies and people doing it today in the pandemic. There are a lot of opportunities that are being created, not just in business. A pandemic is a tragedy and creating so much of hardship, but it's also making some things better and easier than before. We run a school here in South India, and yesterday we had a meeting with the parents, and we were talking about, because all the learning is online now. And one of the problems we always had in the school was the distance between the parents and the teachers, the distance. And what we found out was, since 3 months ago, we started all of it as online learning. The parents are sitting with the kids, watching the classes because they're bored. They can't even leave the house because of lockdown here, or their factories are closed. And they suddenly begin to appreciate the teachers and the efforts they're taking. They're helping their kids more. They're getting friendly with the teachers. There's a rapport that was never there. And suddenly we're getting results better than what we had when the kids were coming to school. We found there was an opportunity in the difficulty. And finally, see the whole which is greater than the sum of the parts. That's what Holmes tried to imagine, a whole that was consistent with all the parts, but went beyond them. He could envision, fill in the blanks, and see what actually happened. And that's what enabled him to find the horse and also predict about the sheep. Okay, so this is the first, today we're talking about the act. The act is a microcosm, and we said it has 4 parts. And the two we really wanted to focus on today was the knowledge of an act and the decision. And we'll take a break now for 10 minutes and then come back to talk about the decision. And we'll go back to something you already know because we talked about it last time, Sully, and what we can learn from the decision that Sully made. But I think you see what I mean when I said the act is a microcosm. In the simple decision of trying to figure out what happened and who killed the trainer, how much is there? How much knowledge is there that goes into coming to that right evaluation of what took place? So that simple thing, he visited there for a day, he got the evidence, and when he tried to put it together, and this is there in every act. Sometimes it looks very small and trivial, but if you blow it up, you'll see there's a universe inside. Okay, we take a 10-minute break, and then we'll see you again, and we will take another break later too.
Okay, talk to you later.
Thank you. So we started saying that we're going to talk about the act as a microcosm, and we said an act involves knowledge, decision, energy, and then action, movement, skilled action or movement. So we saw already that the knowledge component is a lot more complex than we may often think about it. And the processes that we go through in order to decide what's real and what's relevant is a lot more complex than simply having a few pieces of information that you can report back on an examination, as if that's really knowledge. Imagine trying to test somebody for the knowledge or the capacities that Sherlock Holmes had. What type of exam would you use? Imagine if our educational system was designed to consciously develop these mental capacities. How would we do it? How differently would we do it than the way we do it now? These are questions. Well, if knowledge, not just in quantity, but in terms of the intricacy or the secrets of what is knowledge and how we know are complex, we're gonna find that the decision itself is a huge world. It's a microcosm itself, which is highly complex. And so we're gonna zoom in, as we zoomed in to Sherlock Holmes' analysis of facts, we're gonna zoom into the decision that Sully took and see what's involved there. So again, I'd like you to start. Before we do that, just to put this whole discussion in context. These are a list of discussions of examples that we've already had in the course. Srijit started on the first day about the Green Revolution in India and how one man decided that India could double its food production in 10 years, become food self-sufficient in 5 years, and he did it. That decision was a microcosm which transformed the country. We've talked about Julius Rosenwald at Sears many times, and Robert Wood, how he shifted Sears from mail order to the shopping centers, and Thomas Bata, how he built the biggest shoe company in the world, and Marriott building this huge hospitality company, and Iacocca's decision. Steve Jobs' decision, we talked last week about at a time when his company was bleeding money, that was Pixar, he decided to invest, what was it, Bonnie, $200,000 or something, or $500,000?
$30,000.
Huh?
$300,000 for the short film.
Just to make this short film, which had no commercial value. They simply wanted to submit it for the Academy Awards. And that raised Pixar to an $8 billion company when he sold it. And then, of course, the decision we talked about of Steve Jobs coming back to Apple in '66 and what Michael Dell thought about it. And now we're going to talk about Sully's water landing. And we mentioned one more just to remind us, in 1960, 61 perhaps it was, 60, end of 60 or early 61, President John F. Kennedy announced the decision that America would land a man on the moon and bring him back to Earth within 10 years. Now, what was not widely known was getting a man to the moon was pretty easy. You just needed a big rocket. Getting him to land on the moon safely was definitely a problem that had never been solved up until that time. When rockets came back from, when satellites came back from outer space with, capsules came back with astronauts in them, they simply fell in the ocean and were picked up by a ship. There had never been anything that could land on land at that time. It came much, much later. But that wasn't the real problem. The real problem was once you got him to the moon, how would you get him off of the moon and back to a ship that could take you back to Earth? And then even if you were going to land in the ocean, the technology simply didn't exist. And yet they took a decision that involved some 10,000 different agencies under NASA, and he actually landed and got him back about 6 months early. So what goes into making a successful decision that really works? That's what we want to look at now. And we're going to go and start with the decision we already know about, and we talked about it earlier, the decision that Sully made that to land on water. So I want to start by asking you, what are the facts of the case? Just like with the Silver Blaze, what are the facts of the case on which Sully had to make a decision? Go ahead.
The very first was the bird strike, which caused all this situation.
Okay, what was the situation it caused?
The situation was
engines
that
were lost.
both engines were lost.
Both engines were lost. This whole, we would have never heard the name Sully if it had only been one engine that was lost.
Yeah.
Lost planes can handle, but both engines were lost in a twin-engine plane. That was critical. What else was critical?
There was limited, very limited time to land the craft safely.
Remember how much time there ended up being?
208 seconds.
208 seconds.
Yeah, 208 seconds.
They didn't know.
There was no time for them to go back to LaGuardia Airport, from which they were landed off. Yeah.
And by the way, Zizi, it took time for them to figure out that there was no time, because the people that were expected to come back and said, you can come. And it took them 10, 15 seconds just to figure out we don't have time to climb to
go back.
This time was for checking everything, making sure that both engines were damaged, making decision and fulfillment for this decision. This time was very limited, and that's why there was human factors.
Exactly.
In parallel, they kept checking against these rules and policies.
They had to.
Yes.
They had to there was a fixed policy, and they had to follow the rules. And
to be in compliance, with.
Even to the point of trying to restart the engines, which they did. And if the engines had restarted, then all of this wouldn't have been necessary. They had no way of knowing that the engines would restart. In fact, if you remember, the computer simulation came to the conclusion that the engines would have restarted, that they were going to work. But after the crash, that the engines had been deeply destroyed.
Yeah, the simulation was wrong, actually.
What other facts? Important facts.
Also, important fact was that there was people in a plane, and not only one person's life was depending on Sully's decision. There was a lot of people.
Very important fact. 155 people. If it had just been Sully and the pilot, it's one thing. that he had the lives of 155 people, right, Anna? Very important fact. What else? Anything else?
That the captain himself never lost control over himself, and he kept like being quite calm and balanced in that kind of situation.
It's a very important observation.
Absolutely, staying absolutely adequate to the last moment.
Excellent. Excellent. So what?
There was good teamwork also, and Sally, in these 200 seconds, found the time to ask his partner what he thought about his decision, and that's very important. So this is the characteristic of a real leader, in my opinion. Even in this very critical situation, when in a matter of minutes you may lose your life, but he still finds this courage or this calmness and this humanity to ask other person what's his thoughts about saving the plane.
A really important fact.
Yeah.
How about the fact of where they were located?
Yeah, that's he was going to make this forceful landing on the Hudson River.
That was an important fact. If he had been over the Midwest, where the nearest water is 300 miles away, it wouldn't have helped them much in 208. The fact for his decision, the fact that they were over water turned out to be a critical fact. Any other objective, we're calling about, most of these are objective factors, but you mentioned a couple of very important stuff. But what about any more objective factors that we haven't taken into account? How about this one? It happened in the daylight.
Yeah.
Is that
time of occurrence?
important?
Yeah, sure.
Why?
If there was a night, maybe the like visibility wasn't that good as during the daytime.
That's true, Zizi, but there was something even more important, because if you remember that the ships that came to rescue them, they came within a matter of a minute, because those ships were all up and operating.
Yeah, right.
They may not have been there. If it hadn't been daylight, whether he may have landed safely and the plane may have just sunk in the water, as it did eventually,
right.
before anybody could get there.
Yeah, time was very critical there. Like.
Okay, how about this? You mentioned visibility, so night.
Yeah, clear weather with good visibility, exactly. Had there been the mist or fog, yeah, it wouldn't have been that easy to make this water landing.
See what was happening to the plane. The ships nearby were reporting to the airport that you've got a plane going down in the water. And of course, there was something else about the weather, that it was freezing cold.
Yeah, it was January 9th, right?
Yeah, it was, freezing cold. If it had been the summer, there would have been a lot higher survivability once they landed in the water. But you just couldn't stay in that water for a few minutes and still live through it. That was critical. So winter with freezing water. You mentioned already an experienced pilot. How about this one? Wasn't this important? Nobody really had accurate information to take the decision. Nobody could say accurately, go to LaGuardia or go to the other, there were two other airports, I forget, Newark, and there was a third one. And the air traffic controller was considering all three of them. Which one would work better? Did they have clear runways that they could clear for them? Would that path work better than the other one? Nobody knew. And the whole question was Sully right in concluding that he had to land on water? It was not even known after the landing. There was a big controversy over whether or not he made the right decision. until finally they had the hearing.
Mm-hmm.
There was the fact that the procedure obligated him to take instructions from air traffic control. And air traffic control itself didn't know how to handle the situation. They're following a protocol. And he had to call in his supervisor, and this is a fact. There was a procedure to be followed. He can't make it on his own, though he finally did. And then there's a very important fact, which everybody knew. The last thing you want to do is land on water, because the fatality rates, the crash record is so severe, the chances of survival are, that's a fact which the air traffic controllers knew. It's a fact that the pilots knew. And it was certainly something that had to be taken into account. They didn't say, oh, well, look, Sully, if there's any problem, don't worry, you just land on the water and we'll come and pick you up. And the only thing we lose is the plane. That's not what anybody said. The idea of landing on water wasn't even an option for them. The option was which airport to go to. And there was another fact, I'm not even sure we have it on our list, Ronnie. The fact was that he's in a very densely populated metropolitan area. And one of the things he was concerned about is if he attempts to land back at one of the airports and doesn't make it, the chances are of him crashing into a densely populated area with a lot more than 155 people. So the risks are not just the people on the plane. At least if he goes in the water, it's only them. But if he hits a big building, like a World Trade Center or something, you know, we're talking thousands, not a few hundred.
Actually, later he had these nightmares, seeing how he crashes the buildings, and yeah.
So, and finally, that was the first one I think you mentioned, the time to act. So this decision, he only had 208 seconds to act. We're only talking about making a decision. And he has to go through all the analysis of knowledge that we went through in an hour on Silver Blaze. He has to go through that and then act within the decide and act within the 208 seconds. This is really a universe inside. And already you have said that there are some things that are not on this list. If these are the objective factors, there were also subjective factors. Srijit, why don't you take this part? And I think you want to start with the analysis and then we can summarize the subjective factors?
Sir, yeah, can it go to the next slide, sir? You know, I just want to see the slide actually.
Well, I can jump to the subjective factors, or we can go to the next slide, whichever you want.
No, sir. You know, you can finish the subjective matters, then I'll go to the conclusion.
I think that'll work.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can get that.
Gary, it's also true that like Sherlock Holmes, Sally also had intuition how to perform.
He certainly.
I'm calling this intuition gut feeling. I don't know I expressed right or wrong, but I think this was really intuition.
I would have to agree with you, Anna, because there's no way anybody could know for sure that what would work. And he followed, whether you call it a gut feeling, intuition or what, he sensed that this was the best choice. And later they proved that it was the only thing that would have worked. But he had that right sense. So I agree with you. So you already mentioned two subjective factors. One was, do you remember? All right, we'll cover them again. These are the objective factors. What about the subjective factors? You know what I mean by subjective factors?
Yes,
Zizi told.
What's Zizi?
She told Sully was calm and collected.
High emotional intelligence, Sully had.
Very good. His calmness, his poise, very important factor.
His excellent nervous system.
Yeah, This was his personality, the personality of the pilot. If somebody else had been there, circumstances, they may have panicked. Oh, you also mentioned, one of you mentioned the rapport, the teamwork between the two of them. There was never any conflict between the pilot and the co-pilot.
Mm-hmm.
They trusted each other. And the co-pilot knew that ultimately he's going to leave the decision to Sully. He had the confidence in him. And when Sully said, I'm going down, the co-pilot didn't get in a panic, try to grab the steering wheel away from him or knock him out, or even quarrel with him or call air traffic control to override.
Mm-hmm.
He trusted him. So that relationship was critical. If the co-pilot had been skeptical or frightened or suspicious or anything else, the whole thing could have been, but to the end, they worked with great trust and confidence. What else? Anything else that we missed?
High sense of responsibility, skills, and experience.
Wonderful. But how responsible he was. We have a word for it, which we'll discuss again tomorrow, or I mean next week. But he took responsibility to the point of feeling he's responsible for it. This is not his fault that the bird strike came, but he took responsibility that every life on this plane must be saved. And he risked his life waiting on the plane and being the last one to get off, because some fool of the passenger opened the back door, which wasn't supposed to be opened, and the plane started flooding. And he still felt that responsibility to go back and be
He acted like an ideal pilot.
The
person who has to leave the plane the last, one.
He did. And even after he reached the harbor, the port, he wouldn't leave there until he heard that the 155th person had been located.
We're saved. Also, his excellent ability to make the best possible decision in the critical situation based on his experience of 42 years or something.
So the decision making itself was a capacity. Apart from the decision he made, he was a person capable of decisiveness and not hesitating at a moment when there's time to hesitate. And going, it's one thing to agree to do what everybody else says you should do, but how much more difficult it is to take a decision with such a high risk factor, which nobody agrees you should do.
Yeah.
To go against the co-pilot, to go against the manual, to go against air traffic control and still do it, that takes a real capacity, subjective capacity.
And courage, yeah.
And courage. Anything else? Did we miss anything? Okay, let's see what we got here. So responsibility, I called it consciousness responsibility. I'll explain what I mean by that next week, but that was critical, you got that. His confidence in his own knowledge. He not only knew things, but he had confidence in what he knew. He believed in what he knew. And this is very interesting, that he had a unique expertise in water landing. In the movie, it may not come out as well as it comes out in the book, but he actually had been studying water landings for years and volunteering to go on, I forget what you'd call it, evaluation when planes did crash in the water. He volunteered to join the investigations to find out why they crashed and why it went wrong. So he had spent...
Yeah, that was in the movie.
Huh? It was there, yeah.
That was his volunteer to involve in emergency situations.
He had really learned why they go wrong and the mistakes you should avoid. And that's what gave him more confidence that with the right conditions and his skill that he could do it. Okay, we already discussed this. The trust, respect, and harmony between pilot and co-pilot was critical. Calmness, you mentioned this, the courage, the equanimity that he exhibited. The commitment he had to the people's lives. I mean, he was not just being a good pilot. he was personally, humanly, took this so seriously, his responsibility. This is a big thing too. You know, not every person in his position would have exercised the authority to take the final decision himself, to take the full responsibility on himself and not blame anybody else for what happened later. He didn't call air traffic controller, well, I really think I should land on water and I can do it and I've studied for it. Is it okay? He didn't say that. I'm the pilot, I'm the captain, I'm the responsible person, and I take the decision. I don't even ask my co-pilot. I don't want him to be blamed if it's the wrong decision. I don't want to pass the buck. I'm going to take the responsibility. Okay, so we got objective factors and subjective factors. And Srijit, now let's go back and see if we missed any of the subjective factors. Just give that slide. So what are the subjective factors in decision making? Remember now, this is the microscope. We're zooming down on an act, in this case, a decision. And we say, oh, this decision looks to be a lot bigger than I thought it was. It not only has objective factors, it has subjective factors. What do we mean by those subjective factors? We gave some examples, but if we wanted to name the kind of subjective factors, what are we talking about?
So if you can elicit it there, you know, that will be helpful for me to present actually.
You put it out?
Can you click on the slide? Actually, put all the points there, sir. You know.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. See, it's always interesting to assess how we arrive in a decision. We can think about, you know, various decisions we are making in a day-to-day life. Actually, we do take a lot of decisions in our life, personal, professional, smaller ones, bigger decisions, etc. When we are in a team, we can often notice that in a given situation of time, two different people may have two extremely different opinions. More the people, more will be the opinions, but let us have a look onto the factors which influence our decisions. You know, day to day we are accustomed to or we are taking a lot of decisions actually, small and big. We can start with a question: when we have to take a decision? When actually we have to take a decision? Simple answer is when there is a need for it. Let us take the case of Sully again for this matter. He was put into a situation where he wanted to take a decision and execute it in 208 seconds actually. Let us assess his mind. He might have thought of different decisions, right? First is to get back to the airport. Then there is a chance of hitting the aircraft in buildings was there. If he is unable to reach to the runway, even if he reaches the runway, there was a chance of fire crash of aircraft was there. Because engine started burning, he took a decision of water landing on the Hudson River, maybe because he came to a conclusion in his mind that in that way, he can avoid maximum casualties, less chance of fire, possibility of boats in the river. Rescue operations in a river are more easy than if it crash lands in the city or in the runway. He had given the prime priority in saving the human life is for sure. We can often notice that energy level of the people also are determinants of decisions. Highly energetic people are often highly conscious as well. I would like to say decisions often comes from mental experiences. In Sully's case, it is a proven fact. He got that mental expertise and mental experience actually. Here in our case, you know, Sully, he was courageous also, experience, having expertise, man with almost high patience and responsibility actually. Our know-how, mental skills and capabilities, attitude and enthusiasm, and also beliefs influence our decisions. I had seen a lot of people, I'm sure you might have also seen these people who are always positive and creative. Their mind is always tuned to find out solutions. They are always confident about the future. They will always think for options to make everything succeed. That mentality often releases a lot of energy in them. Knowledge, informations, data also can influence our decision. To conclude, our consciousness plays a vital role in decisions. Or I would like to say that, higher the consciousness, better will be the decision. Again, consciousness also is directly proportionate to our skills, knowledge, attitude, and values, which we had discussed during our previous sessions. That's what I want to share, sir.
Great. Thank you, Srijit. Thank you. Let's go back to Sully and now look what happens if the situation were slightly different than it actually was at the time. Bonnie, can you help us out? Oops. Let me find that. This is what we've got. Okay, there we go. Bonnie?
Yes.
That's yours.
I'll begin, Vani. The objective.
It's you, Janani. Sorry.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Thank you. We made a list of these different factors: objective, subjective, and Sully's decision-making process. Now, to use our imagination, like Sherlock Holmes said, and to imagine what if one or two of the objective factors are different. Like, for example, the time of occurrence. We discussed it in the earlier slides. The time of occurrence was very significant. Now, just imagine this had happened at midnight. Then how would things have been different? How would it have affected the decision-making process, the decision, the action? In the middle of the night, he has to land.
I think that in the middle of the night, he wouldn't be able to land on the water. This is my opinion. It would be impossible.
It would be impossible. It would
Sapo
have been...
has an expertise in this. Right.
Actually,
You have watched that many videos on that.
Yeah, actually, it's considered that landing on the water is the hardest thing, and pilots most probably are sure if they have this accident that if they have to land on the water, most probably they won't survive, because the rate of the survival on the water is the lowest. And if it would be night, I don't think it would be possible.
Yes. For one, the visibility to see where the two banks are, and then all the other boats and the ships that were there that immediately came to the rescue. The divers came, the police, everybody was available at that time because it was daytime. And at night, he wouldn't have been able to see clearly, plus the risk is even more, and then the immediate rescue would have been difficult. Now, another point, we can consider any of these, but if we just look at the experience of the pilot, Sully was specially experienced, trained, he had the knowledge about this particular water landing, he had studied it. Now, what if it had been an inexperienced pilot? He says in 42 years that he had not seen it. What if the pilot had had 2 years or 4 years of training? How would that have made a difference?
There would be a very big chance to end all of this landing with disaster. Without knowledge that Sully had, and also 40 years experience.
Probably an unexperienced pilot with just 2 years of experience wouldn't dare to make this forceful water landing, what Sully did.
Exactly.
Like he took this courage following from experience, that his experience gave this courage to him.
Exactly.
In my mind.
And now to just consider one more objective factor. What if he had had less time? We thought less than 4 minutes was low enough. But what if he had had just 100 seconds to think, to decide, and to act? How would that have made a difference? there would have hardly been any time to think, to decide, to act. So this is, half the time that less than half the time that he had. So what difference could this have made to the entire process? Maybe the instructions that he received from the air traffic controller would not have been so positive. There might not have been clarity. He may not have been able to say, come back and land. Would there have been any choice? How would it have been different?
Maybe in that case, he would just follow the instructions from the air traffic dispatcher. Yeah, and would end up in a different way, yeah.
Maybe because he wouldn't have had time to think, he might have just followed the instructions. One possibility. Anything else?
Another opposite way also would have happened. He wouldn't have listened to anything. He would have immediately landed.
Okay, immediately landed on the water because there was absolutely no possibility of reaching the airport. Another possibility, yes.
There was no alternative at that point. Here was the ambiguity that there appears to be an alternative. And with sufficient information, he has to make a decision. There, it would have been a compulsion. The plane would have landed whether he did anything or not. It was running out of fuel or running out of altitude. Great. Okay, so what you've shown, Janani, is one of these objective factors, if it's different, the outcome would be different, or the factors determining the decision to make would be different. How about the subjective factors? Vani?
Okay, subjective factors are the internal factors of the pilot that would have, we have already discussed if Sully had been timid or nervous, if the pilot had been timid or nervous, he wouldn't have taken any right decision. Even if he had followed the instructions, he wouldn't have got he wouldn't have acted it out rightly. And also, if he had not had the confidence in his own knowledge, he already knew a lot about water landing. So that gave him the confidence that he could do it. So that also decided on the outcome of the act. So any one change on the subjective factor would also have ended up in a disaster.
So, Vani, you're saying if you were the air traffic controller, assuming you had the time to do any analysis at all, you would have taken into account not only the objective factors, but you would have been considered the person you're talking to.
Yes.
And if you didn't know the man you were talking to, you would have asked him, how much do you know about water landings?
That was the mistake with the computer simulations. They didn't take up into account of all the subjective factors of the pilot.
They didn't take into account the pilot. They talked about it. They considered this as an objective situation, which could be which the right decision was based entirely on objective factors. They didn't know how to even program into their simulation the subjective factors. It was only about altitude, speed, weight, distance. That was all they were doing. And then the pilots going through the thing. The subjective factors weren't part of the computer program that did the analysis and told them what to do. So, great. So what does this tell us? What conclusions can we draw from this? Some famous man, I'm sure maybe many have said that taking a decision is the hardest thing we do in our lives. Taking the right decision, taking decisions is itself an act. We're talking about it as a component of what I'm calling the complete act, but taking a decision itself is a complex reality, and to do it right, whether it's Steve Jobs coming back to Apple or Julius Rosenthal guaranteeing the customer satisfaction, that takes a lot of courage. Or Lee Iacocca accepting the job at Chrysler when it's going down, sinking down. Or Bata going back and did what he did. A decision is a universe of complexity in it. So what I'd like to do now, what we'd like to do is give you a very simple model to help with decision making based on this. We call it the decision-making matrix. It's our own model. We've used it successfully and analyzed a lot of decisions. So this is a 4-quadrant model. The model itself is quite simple. Q1, the first quadrant, is a quadrant in which the subjective and the objective factors related to your decision are both positive. We have the outer things that we need, and we have the subjective qualities that we need. If your decision falls in the first quadrant, this decision will be successful. This is our hypothesis, and this is our experience. And we've studied, and it'd be very interesting if we had the time to take some critical decisions, whether it is Green Revolution or jobs or Pixar, whatever it is, and study them. This is quadrant 1, gives us a successful decision. What happens if you're in quadrant 2? What happens if you have a subjective conditions, your knowledge, your conviction, your courage, your determination, your teamwork, and everything are very positive, but the external conditions are not supportive. The objective factors are missing. You're missing something critical, like enough time, for example, or enough information. In fact, what they were really missing was enough information. If they'd had the information the moment the engines failed, they could have done this. They could have gotten back to LaGuardia, but they didn't have. It took them a long time to get the information that they have. That's why the simulation showed he'd made the wrong decision, because they forgot that he needs time to get information and to make a decision with inadequate information. So this is the second possibility. The third possibility in any decision is all the objective conditions are positive or sufficiently positive, but subjectively, there's something missing. We said, Vani said, the man is timid, the pilot is timid. He doesn't want to take responsibility. He'd rather just follow the air traffic controller or something like that. What happens in those cases? And what happens if both the subjective and the objective conditions are inadequate? We mean negative, they're inadequate. And you can evaluate any decision and at least come to your own assessment of which of these quadrants it falls in. And I'd like to give you a formula, it's a simple rule of thumb about it. But before I do that, I want to be sure that what I'm saying is clear. Any question about it?
It's clear.
It's clear, okay. That is, when you're faced with a decision, whether it's what you're going to make for dinner or whether you're going to, whatever it is, these are the conditions, and I figure out which quadrant I'm in. So this is the conclusions we've come to. If you're in quadrant 1, the external conditions are positive and the subjective conditions are positive, your act will be a success. If you're in quadrant 2, that is where the subjective conditions are positive, but the objective conditions are not positive, you'll meet a lot of difficulties on the way, but you'll ultimately succeed. We'll come back and talk about why. This is the decision when Jobs came back to Apple. I mean, we tell the story as if it's a simple straight line from Apple sinking into oblivion and Apple becoming the most valuable company in the history of the world. That's that's the short version. But it certainly was a big struggle for them to go and do that. We talk about Bata becoming the biggest shoe company in the world in 5 years, but it didn't just happen by itself. We talk about Marriott growing in spite of, right through the Great Depression, they had to grow. Right through the Great Depression and World War II, they had to grow and still do it. But eventually they prevailed. And the third situation, and this is a very interesting one for me, the quadrant 3 is the external factors are all favorable. But if you're lacking the subjective things that are needed, you get a good beginning, a fast takeoff, and encouraging results, and ultimately you end up failing or disappointed. When I think of quadrant 3, I think about what happened to the 190 or 200 computer companies that started at the same time that Apple was growing, in which 90% of them, we mentioned, 95% of them disappeared within a few years. The initial conditions were very favorable. They were favorable to anybody. You had a new technology, you had a hungry market ready to take it. You could buy the components off the shelf and simply assemble them. You didn't need to be a great wizards at this. You didn't have to create anything new. You simply had to meet the market demand. But those who didn't have something else, the knowledge of how to grow an organization, the knowledge how to develop their people, the knowledge how to manage the 5 engines or components of their business, they grew themselves right out of business. And it's a common phenomenon. And then the fourth, the quadrant where neither the positive or negative are positive, neither the subjective or objective factors are positive, you really never get off the ground. The idea is stillborn, we say. It's voiced, there's an attempt, you can't raise the money, you can't get going, people won't support you, and you end up failing. So this is a simple model. Of course, it's a simplification, but I found it very helpful, faced with any important decision, to start by trying to list all the objective factors that are related to the decision, rate each of them, and which are the ones that are really critical. And then ask about the subjective factors. Now, one of the stories, I don't remember whether we told it or not last week, but I think some of you know, maybe it's been mentioned already, some of you mentioned maybe, that Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak had a third partner. Remember? Anyone remember? We didn't discuss it.
We didn't discuss it actually.
Bonnie, you tell it.
Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak started, they were actually 3 of them. There was another, one of their friends called Ronald Wayne. He also invested some together put $5,000. After 3 days, he changed his mind and said that he wanted to be out. Later, he said that he wasn't so sure and he couldn't risk his peace of mind working with Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. Now, he doesn't live on his own. He has to depend on the state for finance. If he had stayed at least for a few more years, he would have been a millionaire or a billionaire now.
A billionaire.
A billionaire. But in 3 days, he pulled out because he was nervous. So that factor changed everything in his life.
And of course, if Steve Jobs had been like Ron, there would have been no Apple at all. One subjective characteristic, and he never would have made it, even if the conditions objectively were really positive. So the idea of this is when we evaluate decisions, whether they evaluate the decisions of the company you're working in or the department you're in or in your own personal life, it can be very helpful to try to assess the objective conditions and the subjective ones. And this is the conclusions we have drawn on what to do given the situation you're in. Because decisions are very tough to make, and there's no guarantee that your decision is right. So what can you do to enhance the quality of the decision? And this is pretty obvious. You can try to increase your knowledge, because the more knowledge you have, the more likelihood that your decision will be right. And we already had an hour discussion knowing that increasing your knowledge is itself a complex thing. It's not just getting more facts, but it may be thinking about the facts differently. Thinking about the facts that you already have, re-examining them in a different perspective. I listed 7 or 8 of those perspectives to see whether you get more knowledge out of the facts you have. Taking one value in the act and raising it higher. We've given a lot of examples. There was any one value related to the act, if you can raise it higher, like customer satisfaction guaranteed, or ease and simplicity of use, or whatever it may be, motivating your people, that can change the outcome of an act. Raising your motives, the seriousness, the commitment, the intensity, the genuineness, the generosity of your motives. Increasing your commitment and determination for success. Increasing the harmony you have with other people and your own sense of it. Now, do you notice anything unusual about these factors? Something they have in common. They're pretty much all subjective. Given that the objective situation is fixed, and in the case of Sully, there was nothing he could do to change any of those objective factors. Nothing he could do. But he could try to, in the short time available, to increase the intensity of his courage, his commitment, his determination, his rapport and with his co-pilot, his decisiveness, his willing to take the responsibility himself and not wait for others who had less information or knowledge than he did. And those were critical for him. So the conclusion that I've come to out of this is that success is not simply a matter of doing the right thing or doing just the right thing. It's even more a matter of doing what you do with total faith, conviction, commitment, and determination. And if you think about the people we've talked about, Thomas Botha in 1922, Bill Marriott in 1927, Iacocca in 1978-80, Steve Jobs in 1985 and beyond. What stands out, these are not people who were lucky. These are not people who were lucky to be in the right place at the right time. In fact, a lot of the situations they were in looked miserable and impossible. But subjectively, they committed themselves to make their subjective response as powerful as possible, as positive as possible. And that's led me to the conclusion, I can't prove it, it's not a scientific thesis, but I firmly believe it, and I've seen it true in the lives of many people, including my clients and friends and people I've worked with, that if you really are determined, if you're really determined to make something work, the conditions make it possible. If you're waiting to see whether you got the perfect outside conditions, you'll be waiting a long time, and pretty much the chances are the opportunities will pass you by. When when the Nazi Germany attacked and took over Czechoslovakia, Poland, Austria, Belgium, Netherlands, France, and pretty much, and Italy had joined on the Nazi side as well. And Churchill, the British government, Britain was alone in the war now, this tiny island. And Churchill, the Baldwin and Chamberlain, who had been the previous prime ministers, were quickly ready to resign because nobody knew how to handle this impossible situation. And Winston was the only one with the courage to say he would take the post. Nobody wanted to be in the post. And he was sitting at a board meeting, a cabinet meeting, and a telegram was brought into him, handed to him. He opened the telegram in front of his whole cabinet, and he read out, and he said, "Gentlemen, France has capitulated. They have surrendered to the Nazis. We're all alone now. Isn't it exhilarating?" He said, "Isn't it exhilarating? We're all alone." And then he got on the radio the next day to announce to the British people. By the way, he didn't make the mistake of asking the people in his cabinet, "What shall we do? Should we surrender? You think we should surrender? How many are in favor of it?" The majority would have said it's better. Otherwise we're going to be destroyed and we can avoid a lot of casualties. That's what the French did. They surrendered. He didn't ask anyone in the cabinet. He didn't go to the parliament and he said, "Look, I want to know, I want your advice. Should we surrender or should we fight?" He didn't ask anybody. He didn't conduct an opinion poll. He got on the radio. Very famous address. You can hear it even now on the internet. And he said, "We will never surrender." He didn't consult anybody. He said, you know, the famous speech, I'm sure many of you have heard, "We'll fight on the land, we'll fight on the sea, we'll fight on the beaches, we'll fight on the rooftops, we'll fight in the air. We will fight until the last man, but we won't surrender." And the Germans, who had calculated that within 3 months the war would be over because Britain would surrender, there would be no way they could stand against the bombardment. Within 3 months, the Germans gave up and stopped the Battle of Britain because the British were so tenacious and so determined. So this leads to the conclusion that's there in this list. If you look at the really great decisions and great accomplishments, it's the subjective factors that are really the determinant of the result. And in business, we have many good examples, but I think anyone who reads the biography of Jobs knows he never surrendered. He never gave up. He failed with the Macintosh, by the way. It's not that it was a total failure, but it was never a commercial and a financial success. He was thrown out of that one. He failed with Next, spent a lot of $50 million or whatever it was, and it was a failure. He built a factory to produce 20,000 computers a month, and he could only sell 400. He failed with Pixar in the beginning because it was bleeding money until he took that tiny toy and it got converted by Disney into Toy Story. And it's only after he went back and took a more impossible situation than any he had met up until then at Apple that he really began to get the success. But his determination really became the final factor. I want about 5 or 10 minutes more of your time. If you want a break now, we'll take it. Or if you're ready for another 10 minutes, we'll finish the session at least some 5 minutes early. I did promise you 2 breaks, but didn't want to interrupt these sessions. We took longer than we thought because we really wanted the interaction, and I'm glad we had it, and you've really all participated actively. And that's what you'll remember, is when we do this together and you're not just sitting listening. Okay, so then if you agree, let's go and finish it up. So we've been talking about an act, and we talked in the beginning that an act requires knowledge and it requires decision. And we said it requires two other things as well. It requires the energy to motivate the act, and it requires that that energy gets expressed through skilled movement, skilled action. It may be a technical skill, it may be a human communication skill, it may be flying a plane or using a computer, whatever it is, but there is an action necessary, as Georgie said, and the greater the skill, the greater the results. So what happens when you get all these elements together? What happens when you act? Because a lot of our acts succeed and a lot of acts don't succeed and they don't give the right results. What happens if one of these elements is missing? This is what we're trying to get through in this exercise. And what we're saying is the requirements for an effective action, for accomplishment, are you've got to have the energy, you've got to have the knowledge, you've got to have the skill, you've got to have the interest, you've got to be willing to make the effort, whether it's mental, emotional, social, or physical. And there are certain values necessary for any act to be success, not just values that we talk about, but values that we're going to act on. The sense of responsibility that Sully had, or the sense of teamwork between the pilot and the co-pilot, was not just a noble idea. They exhibited that harmony and teamwork under impossible situations. And you need the courage, whatever that act is, the courage to do, to make the right decision. Iacocca had it, Bata had it, Marriott had it, Jobs had it, everybody, Sully really had it. Without that element of the fortitude, the act doesn't give its full results. And you need patience. Sully didn't need patience so much because there was no time to be patient, but he did need peaceful calm and not to panic in the situation. So we can call that patience. Jobs had to wait a long time from the founding of Apple before anybody could really say he was achieved one of the greatest things in the world. It didn't come to him in the first few years. He went through a lot before he could do it. And you have to have the perseverance to keep trying and keep persisting until the results. These are the qualities. Endurance, which is even not just to persevere, but you can hold up under that. These are the qualities that go into effective action. So these are the components of an act. Every one of these goes into every act, of course, in different measure, in different intensity, with different significance. And if you have these, so to summarize, you've got to have the knowing, an awareness, ideas, thoughts, the right beliefs. You've got to decide, you've got to have the willingness, the intention, the purpose, the goals, the objectives. You've got to have the energy, you've got to have the emotion, the attitudes, the feeling, the urge, the impulse. And you've got to have the skilled execution. And if you have all of these together, this is what we refer to as a complete act. A complete act has to meet these three conditions. If it's a complete act, it means an act that's capable of generating full results, and not only that, but growing and continuing and multiplying and continuing in future. You need the clarity of knowledge and decision. You need the emotional enthusiasm and the skilled execution. It's a simple concept. But you'd be amazed if you look at acts that fail, how often you'll see that one or more of these elements is missing. It would be interesting if you, in the next 1 week, you can reflect in your own company at things that have worked and things that haven't worked. Take any act or any decision and see, Did we have all the knowledge we needed? Did we have all the commitment? Were we really all behind this? Had we really made the decision? Did we release our energy and support it enthusiastically or very hesitantly, half waiting to see whether it would succeed or not? Did we do everything we should do in the execution of the act? I'd be very interested in hearing your reflections. If anything comes to mind now, I'm happy to listen to it. Anybody have a thought about an act that really worked, that it meets these conditions, or an act that didn't generate the results? Personal, but I'm talking about in the work also, or particularly, where you see that what was missing from it. We've been talking about successes in business because that's what we want to build. We could equally have a course on the failures where it would be more obviously what was missing. Anybody have a thought? Anything come to mind? If not, that's fine, but I would suggest think about it for the next 1 week. Think about something that's happened in your life, particularly in the life where you've been working, and see whether this helps you identify, this is why we were successful. We did have all these things, or this is why we failed or didn't get the results. Because though we blame it on objective conditions, the truth of the matter was there was something more we could have had, something more subjective we could have done, which we didn't do. Okay. Next week is the last lecture, and then you'll be free and clear of us. And we're going to come back and talk about some ways, unusual ways. I don't think you'll find this in any of the textbooks in the theory of organization, maybe not much in theory, in MBA at all, but I hope you'll find them interesting and useful in life. I found them very useful, and my clients have found them very useful as well. On what can we do? We broke it down from the society and the company to the individual act. We've said it's a microcosm. Okay, what can we do to make every act more successful? And we're going to give you some examples of that. And to prepare for that, just like we use Sully, you've got some homework. And let me go to that. I asked, you remember we last week we mentioned Bagger Vance. We put him on the list of great leaders, right? Which nobody had ever heard of. I don't know if any of you went and looked him up or not, but the serious homework assignment, not just entertainment. It is a very entertaining movie, but it's also full of knowledge and wisdom and of personal relevance. So I'd like you to watch the movie. If you have time, watch it twice because there's so much in it that you can't get in one case. And I want you, just like you did with Silver Blaze, identify at least all the key actions that Bagger took. Bagger was the leader. He was the coach. He was the leader, really, though he's not the hero in the story. All the key actions that he took to help Juna accomplish. In fact, you can watch for not only how Juna succeeds in the act, in this story, but you can also see all the reasons he was failing at the same time. You'll be able to see both the sources of his failure and the sources of his success. So it's a very good film. Study it, make some notes, and when we come back, I'm going to ask you to start off with what did we see there that was pulling him down, and what were the things that he did or what Bagger did to help him become effective and accomplish remarkably under those circumstances. Since next week is our last lecture, I'd like to devote the second half of it, or as much time as you want, to a review and an open discussion. So we will talk next week about the final exam. The basic format is our proposal is we're going to give you a set of questions to take home and prepare at home for the week before the final. And submit your questions to us 2 days before the final. And then and we will evaluate your questions, and then we will meet each of you for 15 or 20 minutes and discuss with you not only the questions you have answered, but we'll raise some other things at the same time. I hope you get by now that I'm not looking for you to memorize a lot of facts. And that's why the exam is open book. What we're looking for is your understanding of the principles and your capacity to apply those principles to action. So though you may get all the facts you need out of the books or even out of off the internet, the application is your part. And that's what we'll be really looking for and evaluating you on. So at least half the session next week, as if you want it, will be open for any discussions. You can go back to any topic we've discussed up until now and say, why did you waste our time talking about this for 3 hours? What is the relevance of this? What do you think we should have learned out of it? Ask any question you want, and we'll try to help you so that you come prepared for the final. Any questions?
Okay, that's great. I think it's a good format, this exam format. And Gary, one question. So we'll have the final discussions on the exam day, right? After we have submitted the exam work.
Exactly. We'll ask for your answers a couple of days before so we can read them and study them and come prepared, which is our homework. Come prepared. And
right.
We'll ask you why you have written what you wrote or what you thought about it, but we'll also go beyond that in order to see just how much you got out of the course.
Right.
I have also one question about homework. Should we send the list of key actions or only make notes for ourselves and then discuss?
If you send us the list, we'll compile it beforehand and then we can discuss it, but I kind of be happy to hear. I like the way it worked today when you just told us, you know, what you had in mind. But in order to do that on the spur of the moment, it'll be good. It's not a test. It's not a homework to do.
Okay.
It's really, I just want you to know them so that you see, I think you see from the Silver Blaze, the better you know the story, the more you can understand and see the difference between the Scotland Yard and Sherlock, the more you can get out of the story. I want you to get, there's a lot in the Bagger story. There's a lot of depth in it. So the better you know it and understand it, the more the discussion will be meaningful and the more you can contribute. And I'll be very happy to listen to you for the next, for the first hour and a half next week and not, rather than you listening to me. Okay?
Okay, great. Yes.
Anything else? Okay. 9 minutes early, we'll let you go. Have a good one. Be safe.
Okay. Thank you, Gary.
Okay.
Thank you.
Talk to you next Saturday.